Thank you.
Okay.
Are you able to see? In the early morning hours of August 8th of 2014, Christine McInday and Cory Thomas went to bed at her residence located at 3496 Pueblo Way. What they did not know when they went to bed, and what they could not have known, is that within hours they would be attacked and beaten to the point that you see in these photographs. Cory Thomas's beating would last 10 minutes. Christine McInday's beating would last over 2 hours. The person responsible for the injuries that you see to these two people is the man that sits before you, War Machine, his legal name, and born Jonathan Copenhaver. But to really understand the dynamics of what was going on in those early morning hours, we have to go back to the beginning of the relationship. You will hear testimony that in 2013, Ms. McInday and the defendant met one another. You probably guessed by now by reading the jury questionnaire that these were two people that were well known by the public. Ms. McInday was an adult film star, and the defendant was an MMA star. He had also worked in the adult film industry as well. And in 2013, he signed a contract with Hustler to do a shoot, and he asked Ms. McInday if she would join in the shoot as well, and they met on set at that photo shoot at Hustler. Now, they became friends, and shortly after that started a relationship with one another. As you also may have learned from the questionnaire and from the questions we asked all of you during the voir dire process, is that there were some sexual behaviors that were somewhat atypical. For instance, Christine McInday liked to be choked during sexual intercourse, and that was something that she consensually did. But the two used safety mechanisms like a tap or some way to communicate when the choking was getting to the point where she wanted it to stop. Now, a couple months into the relationship, what initially drew the defendant to Ms. McInday, her porn career, quite quickly started to disgust him, and he became more and more territorial over her. He didn't want her to work in the porn industry anymore, and he was pretty vocal about that. He didn't like the thought of her having sex with other males, whether it was part of her job or not. And Ms. McInday will tell you that she was constantly trying to make him feel more comfortable, constantly trying to make him feel like he was the only one. Right after they started dating, they also got tattoos. The defendant put Mack for Christine McInday on his neck, and then Ms. McInday put property of War Machine on the back of her right shoulder. Several months into their relationship is when the domestic violence started. And you will hear from Ms. McInday, and she will tell you that in the beginning of the relationship, the defendant was able to control his anger. He would get heated quickly, but he would remove himself from the situation and often leave the room. But that didn't last very long. Shortly after that wasn't working anymore, he started hitting her and striking her about the face and the head, most of the time within an open hand versus a fist. And then the choking started. And the choking was something that happened quite frequently. You will hear about several instances of domestic violence that went on throughout their 15-month relationship. Now, obviously, we're not going to go through every time this happened, but you will hear about a few of the choking incidents. You will also hear about the Boulevard Mall incident. Both parties refer to it as the Boulevard Mall incident. And you'll also hear about an incident called the Houston incident. Like I stated before, choking was something that happened quite frequently within the relationship, and this is not to be confused with the consensual choking that happened within the bedroom. That was something that Ms. McInday liked, that's something that she requested, and that was something that was consensually done during sexual intercourse. The choking I'm referring to right now was violent. He would use, at times, both hands to choke her to the point of unconsciousness, And sometimes he would go behind her and put her in a headlock, and she would be choked to the point where she could not breathe and she would lose consciousness. You will also hear about the Boulevard Mall incident. In regards to this, you will hear that Miss McInday and the defendant went out to a dinner, a sushi dinner. And on that particular evening, she was wearing a wig, which was very common for her to wear. And she was also wearing these gold-plated little fangs on each of her eye teeth. Something someone had sent her from LA. He had designed them and made them specifically for her. Well, the defendant did not like the fact that she wore wigs. That was something that he told her all the time. And he was angry that she was wearing this set of gold fangs that a man had made and given her from LA. And so when they got into the vehicle, they drove all the way home, and he started becoming very angry that she was wearing these teeth, and they got into a fight about it. And Miss McInday said, I like my wigs, I'm going to wear my wigs, I like my fangs, and I'm going to wear my fangs. And at that point, the defendant got very angry. He turned around, he was yelling at her, and she will tell you that she knew that she was going to get beaten. So she put her head down, she took out the fangs, she put them in her purse, and she waited for the attack to start. When it got to the point where she got to a stoplight, where the defendant drove up to the stoplight, she very slyly took off her seatbelt and tried to jump out of the vehicle. The defendant grabbed her by her wig, grabbed her by her hair, pulled her back in, took her head and slammed it into the dashboard, chipping her too. He then took her by her hair, brought her face over to him, and bit her in the lower part of her left chin. He then screamed at her, yelled at her, slapped her a few times. She lay down crying, her face was bleeding, and he punched her in the back. And she just begged him, please stop, and now Christine's face is bleeding and there's blood everywhere. And the defendant says to her, it's gone too far, I'm going to have to kill you. People saw you try to get out of the car, we're not going to be able to hide what has happened to your face, what has happened to your tooth, and I'm going to have to kill you, and I'm going to have to take you to the desert. Christine begged him, please do not do this. We can go away for a while, we'll go in hiding, I'll never tell anybody, no one will ever know about this. She was able to talk him down. They'd go back to her residence where she lived with her mother. The defendant went into the home first to make sure her mother was nowhere around. He went back to the vehicle, licked his hands, cleaned the blood off of her face, and then she went into the residence and kind of stayed in hiding for a few days. She was a public persona, and so she had to make sure that no one saw her face. But what she did start doing was she started taking photographs of her injuries. You'll see the chip on her tooth from the hit to the dashboard, and then you'll see some marks that she took about a week later, and you'll have these pictures and evidence. You can see them a little bit clearly, but there's markings to her eye, and there's also markings to her nose. Sometimes she would take these pictures and she would send them to the defendant to show, like, look, my face is getting better, because a lot of the time they were in somewhat of a long-distance relationship. The defendant lived in San Diego, and Miss McInday lived here in Las Vegas. Miss McInday will tell you that she kept these pictures to remind herself of what she was going through. In case she ever wanted to leave, she could look back and remember what was going on. She kept all of these abuse photos in a hidden folder on her Google account on her cell phone. Miss McInday spoke out publicly on Twitter several times in regards to the abuse that was happening within her relationship, and she was met with a lot of dissent from people on Twitter and on Instagram. Here, she says, at Trenta Saru, he threatened to kill me and took my phone away after it happened, but I'm away from him now. And no, it wasn't just a slap. He full-on beat the shit out of me. Couldn't show my face in public because of the beating. And you'll see a couple of these posts. These predate the incident on August 8th. These are during the relationship. And she also would post things like this, at 08KR Machine. I didn't let him, but I did stay after several slapping, choking, unconscious, smothering, kicking, and throwings. And Christy will tell you that after she posted these things, she would get tons of negative feedback from fans of his, from people in the public. And so she just decided, I'm not gonna talk about this anymore. No one's here to help me, no one's here to support me, and I'm not gonna do it anymore. But you will hear from several friends of hers, and you will hear from her mother, Erin McInday. They are very close. Aaron McInday lived with Christine in her home. And friends and family will tell you that Christy became more and more isolated. She wasn't around her friends as much. She started dressing differently. Before, she would wear tank tops and things like that. She started covering up her body. She would often have bruises and marks to her face, and she would always make excuses. Always say, oh no, nothing's going on, nothing's happening. You also hear about the Houston incident. And one thing you'll learn about Miss McInday is that she is an avid lover of animals, and especially her pets. She has 2 pit bulls that she loves very much, Cleopatra and Patrick Swayze, and she loves snakes. She has several snakes, and she also has ferrets. In May of 2014, Miss McInday went to Houston for a job. And while at work, she found out that the defendant was sleeping with several other females. She became upset about this, but didn't confront him until she got home. When she got home, she found out that her favorite snake had died. So as you can imagine, she's very upset when she gets home, and she's being quite cold towards the defendant. They're in bed, and the defendant licks his hand and starts to rub her vagina. And that was something how he signified that he wanted to sleep with her. Christy was angry with him. She didn't want to do that. She was upset about the snake. She was upset that he had been sleeping with other females, and so she wasn't paying him any attention, was pushing him away. That angered him. And so he turned her over, flipped her onto her stomach, and tried to anally penetrate her, but could not do so. So he then flipped her back over and penetrated his penis into her vagina and raped her. After it was done, she went into the shower and she cried and cried. And you will hear from Christy that the defendant went in, was screaming at her, "What are you crying for? What's so bad about that? What are you crying for?" These are the types of things that Miss McInday will talk to you about. Shortly after that, in May of 2014, the defendant broke up with Miss McInday. And while she was on a shoot in New York, he packed up everything from the home and he moved back full-time into San Diego, but he did not leave his key to the residence. In June of 2014, Christine met Cory Thomas. You'll hear from Mr. Thomas today. He is he lives in Las Vegas. He owns a web design company, and the two met and they began dating. And one thing that they would do while they were dating is they would take trips. They took a few trips to California. And when Cory would be out with Christine, lots of people would stop them and would ask to take pictures with her, and then they would post the pictures with her on social media. And so word quickly got around that Christy was dating someone new, and that was Cory Thomas. Well, the defendant found out about that. And at one point, Christy was I believe at a shoot in LA, and she started receiving text messages from the defendant and communications saying that he was going to kill himself. And so Christy, just like she always did, ran to his side. And then at that point, her and the defendant spoke. He promised her it was going to be different, things were going to change. They even talked about getting engaged, and she believed that things were going to be different. And he made her all the promises that he normally made. And so then Christy was at an issue where she was dating Cory, but that the defendant was telling her that this was going to be different and this was going to change. And so you'll hear from Cory, and you'll find out when she got back from that trip, he could definitely tell that Christy was distancing herself from him, and he definitely felt that she was different. That brings us to August 7th of 2014. That weekend, Miss McInday had a tattoo convention that was going to happen at the South Point Hotel. And so she needed help like setting up her booth and getting supplies. She asked the defendant if he would be willing to come and help her, and he told her that he wouldn't be able to come right away because he had a fight in California that weekend, but he would be able to come later on in the weekend. He also told her that he had a surprise for her. So she expected him later on in the weekend. So on August 7th of 2014, her and Cory Thomas go around town preparing for the convention, and Cory is helping her. In the later part of the 7th, they pack both of their Range Rovers. Cory parks his Range Rover, right here in the front of Miss McInday's residence, and she parks her Range Rover right here in the driveway. And the idea is that they're going to pack up the vehicles and they're going to have to leave very early in the morning to go to the convention and set up. So they do that, they pack their vehicles, they get ready. I think they watch Netflix, a couple of movies, and then shortly after midnight, they go to sleep. Now, you will hear that all of a sudden while they're sleeping, this door comes open, the lights turn on, and the defendant is standing there. Both of them are shocked. They both kind of sit up in the bed. The defendant looks at Cory. He runs to Cory. He jumps on the bed and he starts wailing on his face. Hit after hit after hit after hit. Cory sticks up his hands to protect himself, and then the defendant begins to choke him. Now Christy, knowing that this is what the defendant does, very quickly hops out of bed and puts the two dogs out because the defendant has been violent towards her dogs in the past. She puts those dogs out. She then runs to the bathroom. She takes her cell phone and she makes a 911 call.
Friday, August 8, 2014, 01:55 and 41 seconds.
911 emergency directed, 1763, please, fire vehicle. Anyone hear me?
You'll have that 911 call back in evidence and be able to hear it clear. But Miss McInday is screaming, "John, stop, you're going to kill him. John, stop," and you'll hear the repetitive hits over and over and over again. What's going on is that Christy has made that 911 call and she has hidden the phone because she knows that if the defendant catches her, he's going to kill her. She then goes to the bathroom where she still was in the bathroom, and she takes the phone and she hangs up the phone. 911 calls her phone back 2 more times, but each time she presses end because obviously she's not in a position where she can answer it. She then deletes all the calls in her phone so that if the defendant does get to her, He will not know that that's what she did. Now what's going on during that phone call is that the defendant, like I stated earlier, puts the other victim, Cory Thomas, in a chokehold. Cory gets off the bed and uses the furniture to take his foot and push away. When he does so, the defendant slams the back of his head while he's choking Cory into the wall, and they both fall to the ground. It's right here in this area where you see the puddle of blood that the defendant gets Mr. Thomas into a really strong chokehold, a chokehold where he's not able to move, and he begins to think that he's going to die. And he will tell you he's struggling to breathe, he cannot breathe, and he thinks to himself, I'm going to die in Christy McInday's bathroom. He then takes a hand and he does what's called breaking a choke. He sticks a finger in, he breaks a choke. He gets more hits, more hits, more hits. But the defendant is starting to get tired. The defendant puts him in another chokehold. He's able to break that. And then the defendant turns to him, and Cory looks at him and he says, what is your end game here? Are you here to kill me? Are you going to let me walk out of here? What is the deal? And during the beating, the defendant was screaming at Christy, tell him you love me, tell him I'm the one, tell him we're going to get married. And so now Cory's confused because Miss Mack is agreeing. She's yelling, yes, yes, that's all true, that's all true. The defendant looks at Cory and he says, I'm going to let you leave. I have all of your information. If you go to the cops, all of my friends are Navy SEALs and Hell Angels, and this won't turn out good for either of us. Cory says, okay, and he walks out the door. Cory at this point has no idea what's going on. He thinks, okay, maybe these two are actually in a relationship and I didn't know it, and so she's been cheating on me with him, and he doesn't know what to think. So he drives to his business, the Web Squad, located on Spring Valley, and he assesses the damage to his face. Like I said, he had taken several hits to the face, he had been choked many times, and he had also been bitten. Right here, you can see the bite mark, and there's also another bite mark that the defendant bit him to his right arm. And so he goes to his business to kind of assess the damage and figure out what he should do about this. Now he leaves the residence, and Miss McInday is there by herself, and she thinks, hey, I called 911, the police know, they're going to be on their way. She says the defendant then turns to her, takes off his white shirt. He owns a company that makes clothing called Alpha Male Shit. He's wearing this Alpha Male shirt. He takes it off, he throws it on the ground, and he says, this is why I can't wear white, baby, because I always get it messed up. And then he attacks Christy. Christy will tell you she doesn't remember the beginning hits. She just knows that she was hit, and she remembers him having her take a shower. She doesn't know how she got in the shower, but she remembers while she's in the shower, she's bleeding, she can taste her own blood, and she remembers him going through her phone. And every time he found something he didn't like, he would scream at her. At some point, she's taken out of the shower, and she's laying in this area in her bathroom. And every time he finds someone that she's following on Twitter or on Instagram and he doesn't like it, he punches her to the face. She lays there, she takes hit after hit after hit. When the beating was no longer enough for him, he then takes a knife and goes through all of her wigs and starts shredding her wigs. Like I said, he hates her wigs. When that wasn't enough for him, he then takes his knife, and Miss McInday was known kind of for a mohawk with a long ponytail. He takes the knife and he cuts all of her hair off. During this process of the scene, you will see that her hair is found in multiple places within that bathroom. While he is using the knife, he actually breaks it and breaks the knife part off of the handle. He then takes that handle and starts to create lacerations on her head. He digs it into her head, he digs it into her ear, he digs it into her hands. Miss McInday will tell you that at one point she wakes up, she's lying on her back, her legs are spread out in front of the defendant, excuse my language, and he says, "That's my pussy and I'm going to take it back." He then licks his hand, places it on her vagina in an attempt to lubricate it, as he tries to get himself hard, but he's not able to do so, and that makes him angry, so he continues to beat her. At one point, she has been kicked several times into the leg and also into the rib, and she gets up hoping that, she can get out of there, and she says, "Please, I need help. I need help." And he says, "Nobody is going to come help you. There's nothing they can do for you." And then she kind of starts to shake, and he throws her the dog's blanket. Christy will tell you that after the brunt of this is over, she's bleeding, she's missing teeth, her eyes are beginning to swell shut, and he starts to panic because this time he's really done it. And he tells her, this is it. Like, I've got to kill you now. There's no way we're going to be able to hide this. And he starts text messaging Cory. He knows Cory has left, and so he starts text messaging Cory from Christy's phone. He sends a message, "Sorry, hope you're okay, this is all my fault. Are you okay? He calmed down now. Can't believe this happened. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I hope you'll forgive me." And then, so Cory gets these things and he thinks, okay, well, I guess she's okay. So Cory says, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, are you? Did he hurt you?" "No, he left. He just yelled. Please give me a call. I'd just like to hear that you are okay." While these text messages are going on, Cory starts realizing, I don't think this is Christy that is texting me. The defendant knows that there are going to be several people at the convention tomorrow, and so he tells Christy, "I've got to come up with something because these people are going to know you're gone tomorrow." And so he starts texting Christy's family and her friends. In the text message to her mother, he sends a message to Christy's mother that says, "They tried to screw me over on the convention. I'm not going now." And so her mom writes back, "Oh no, what happened?" She writes back, "They tried to change the deal. Screw them. I'm going to sleep. Love you, night." And that way, if Christy goes up missing tomorrow, no one's going to think anything of it because she's not going to be expected to go to the convention where she was planning to be the whole weekend. Like I said, the defendant tells her that he has to kill her and there's nothing that she can do about it. He runs downstairs, throws away the knife that he used or throws it on the counter, and then grabs the knives that you see here. When Christy is lying in her bedroom, she knows that that's her only chance. It's her only chance to get away. She's naked and she's bloody, but she makes her run for it. She runs out of her balcony. She hops the fence. This is her home, 3496 Pueblo Way, where she was staying on the golf course. And then she runs and just starts randomly beating on doors, begging for someone to let her in. You will hear from several of the neighbors in those residences, and they will tell you that they could see through the little eye hole. They could see that there was someone who was naked. They seemed to be kind of covered in a blanket, but they were covered in blood, and they were too scared to answer the door, and so they wouldn't answer. Finally, someone comes to the door who lives in this area right here, and they are also scared, but they do open the door and they tell Christy that she can hide in the back of their yard until the police get there, and they call 911. Christy is then taken by ambulance to Sunrise Hospital. During the same time Christy is being taken to the hospital, Cory Thomas makes a decision to call the police, and one of his friends who met him at his company makes the 911 call for him. He also goes to the hospital. You will hear from several patrol officers and detectives that were involved in this case. The first two individuals that you'll hear from are Officers Truex and Shoemaker, now Shepherd. They will tell you that when that initial 911 call that you heard came out at 1:55 in the morning, they were dispatched to that location. And there is a tool used if you call 911 called Gizmo. And Gizmo can work with dispatch in trying to triangulate to figure out where that 911 call is from. And so they speak with dispatch, they get, hey, there's a 911 call, it's a female, it sounds like two men are fighting in the background, and they go to the neighborhood, but unfortunately they go to the wrong house. They get called out at 1:56, They go to a neighbor's house, the neighbors answer the door, everything's fine, and so they leave at 2:30. And so they weren't able to get to Christy while the beating was going on. You'll also hear from detectives who worked the case and who conducted interviews. And then you'll also hear from Jerry Dermanillion, who is a sexual assault nurse examiner, and she'll explain to you what that is and what her job duties are. You will hear from crime scene analysts who went to the residence and took photos and also documented the injuries at the hospital. This is Christy shortly after she arrived at the hospital. She had several broken bones, including broken ribs and a lacerated liver. Most of the beating happened to Christy's face. She was pretty much not recognizable at the time that she got to the hospital. Her eyes were swollen shut. She had a complete blown out orbital fracture to her eye. Her nose was broken in 3 places. Her teeth were punched out of her mouth. The ones that actually didn't get punched out, the ones that remained were fractured. You will see several of the lacerations that the defendant caused when he used the knife. And then you'll see the bruising to the leg where the defendant repeatedly kicked her. You will also see Cory's injuries. Those were documented by photography as well, the bites. He had a broken nose, and there was also another bite mark documented to his right forearm. After Ms. McInday was in the trauma unit and in the hospital for 3 days, but as you can imagine at this point in time, the defendant is on the run and no one knows where he is, and she's very fearful of her life. So she goes into hiding and lives with Cory Thomas for about 30 days. You hear from someone from the U.S. Marshals, and what this individual will tell you is that on August 15th of 2014, they were investigating and trying to find where the defendant was. They found him in a hotel in Simi Valley, in a room under a female's name, and they went into the room. He did not follow commands, he was tased, and he was arrested. You will hear from fingerprint analysis who fingerprints the knives. You will also hear from a DNA analyst who goes through the home and processes the blood. You will also hear from a computer forensics lab analyst who went through the telephone of the defendant and got certain text messages and certain emails off of the defendant's phone, some of which show the previous abuse that had happened in the 15 months. Ms. McInday's phone, the phone where she kept all of the pictures, was never recovered. The defendant took it after he left Ms. McInday's house, and so that evidence was not able to be recovered. You will hear about the multiple surgeries that Ms. McInday had to go through in order to repair her face, including the broken bones to her nose, as well as several oral surgeries because of the damage done to her teeth. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this trial, after you see all of the items of evidence, after you hear the testimony of Cory Thomas, and after you hear the testimony of Christine McInday, the state will ask you to go in, deliberate, come back, and find the defendant guilty of the crimes in which the state has charged him. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Defense, opening.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Are you? Yeah, I'm just doing this. Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Once again, I'm Jay Liederman. With me is Brandon Sua and John Copenhaver. And Ms. Booth told a detailed version of the story, which we believe the evidence is going to contradict in a number of key places. However, as I expected that to be the case in opening, I'm taking a smaller portion and I'm going to show you what the evidence shows there. So we have getting together two damaged people, both in their insecurity. On one side, you have Mr. Copenhaver, who makes himself the dominant alpha male, hence the clothing company. On the other side, you have this image and body insecurity from Ms. Mack that she gets validation by through her public persona, as does Mr. Copenhaver, and through private sexual contact. This was a codependency. Actually, where he was 5 days before, and where he had lived on 2 different occasions, and where he had moved out on 2 different occasions because he no longer wanted to live with her. And this is public for the world to see. Maybe it's hard to see. I'll read it to you. The next ones are going to be difficult. On Twitter, I can't sleep. I need my one. You should be here. August 7th, 11 o'clock in the morning. What else do we have? August 7th, 13:15. That's 1:15 in the morning. To Christie. And by the way, let me back up for a second. The evidence is going to show here. I talked about immaturity. Some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not be. There is something called LOL speak. LOL, laugh out loud speak, or LOL speak, LULZ. It's something that for the most part, young people, kids, use on the internet. And it's a lot of replacing S's with Z's on the end and a lot of abbreviations and adding things. That's going to help you understand this. Has, H-A-Z, surprise for Mack. Now remember, just about a week earlier, Ms. Mack had asked him to marry her. Has surprise for Mack. It goes 20 minutes from 1:15 to 1:35. He texts again, doesn't wants. 1 minute later, does. What is? Doesn't. So slow, referring to a 20-minute lag, because in that relationship there were no 20-minute lags in conversation. They went all day, every day. From text, to email, to Twitter, to Instagram. Doesn't. So slow. Yeah. No. And then a little bit later, what is my present? Frowny face. Yes, it was 15-minute delay. That's slow. No. Working on mom moving out. Talking about moving back in together, getting married, working on her mother moving out. Now takes dogs to Starbucks. What is? Wants to know what the present is. Something surprisingly. This is the surprised emoji. You'll like dough, D-O-E. She asks, teapot? And then a little bit later, that same day, here we have 5 o'clock, 1709. 5 o'clock, Victor bit me. Now he has to die. Victor's her snake. Mr. Copenhaver says, okay, hard? Yes. You gonna kills? Needs to get new daddy then. If she had to kill the snake on her own, she needs to get someone other than John. Yes. Might make you. She might make him kill the snake. L is for LOL, K is for okay. LOL, laugh out loud. And then here we have even later, 9 o'clock that night. You won't be able to bring the ferrets if you go to the fights. Mr. Copenhaver was supposed to go to fights on Friday night in Los Angeles. One of his friends was fighting in a MMA event, and that's where she expected him to go. However, again, a minute later, 9:31, If I go to fights, I'll come to you Saturday. I don't think I'll go. I don't think I'll go. Meaning you should expect me.
Judge, I'm going to object as to his interpretation of what the messages mean.
Yeah, talk about what you expect the evidence to show.
That is what I expect the evidence to show. I don't think I go, he says. Okay, so what times you get here? 6 to 7. Time is thing? What time is her tattoo convention? 3 to 11. 6 to 7, he says. We'll get there. And then here is at 10 o'clock, 22:37, so that's 10:37, for my sexy Mr. Machine. And this is a JPEG, a picture that's attached. And he says, I needs that. It's all yours. So that's the JPEG, and this is an edited version. As you can imagine, there is more to this picture. And there's a second picture. It's all yours. At 10:37 on the 7th. Now, we're at 0:45 on the 8th. 1 hour and 7 minutes before the incident. And here we have, she's up texting him, lol, 153. 153 is a variation on 143, which is I-L-O-V-E, or in their case, L-O-V-E-S-Y-O-U. Bless you. I love you, 90. 044, 12:44 a.m. Now we have approximately 1:52 a.m. And then there's the 911 call at 1:55 a.m. And then it all happens. And then it all breaks loose. The heart shatters. The passion explodes. You've heard the tape. The first thing Ms. McInday does after watching Mr. Copenhaver come in and put his things down is take 2 pit balls off the bed, walk through this sliding door, and put them out on the balcony there. Here's a reverse shot. You can see that's the slider from the bedroom, and although in this picture the door is ajar, the balcony is closed, and the dogs are put outside. That door is open at some point right there. This is another picture of it from the street. You can see the glare from the windows, and that is the balcony, open for all neighbors to hear. For all neighbors to hear 2 hours worth of screaming and yelling. This is the next door neighbor, the ones that the police contacted. I'll show you another picture in just a second. But this is their bedroom, and this is Ms. McInday's bedroom. They claim not to hear anything. Here's their open garage. You can see the fence is the same. And Mr. Thomas, and I do refer to him as poor Cory Thomas, he is in the wrong place, in the wrong time, in the wrong bed. This is not his fault. So, I want to, before I talk about him, you're going to hear from this DNA expert that's going to tell you that all that blood around is Mr. Thomas's and Mr. Copenhaver's. You saw pictures in the state's opening of a drywall hole, I should say a hole in the drywall. That's Mr. Copenhaver's head going into that drywall. And you will hear Mr. Thomas testify that at that point they fell down. But what you will also hear from the DNA expert and see from the evidence is that when they fell down, Mr. Copenhaver's head went into the side of one of those nightstands, right into the corner, and it broke the nightstand and it cracked open the back of his head. And then they fought. And then, so it was choke. No, well, let me catch up to myself. He asks John, Mr. Thomas asks Mr. Copenhaver later on, are you going to let me leave or are you going to kill me? You've heard that now. And he lets him leave. And we're going to discuss facts that don't rise to the level of certain crimes. And I'm not going to talk to you.
I'm going to object us to argument, Robin.
I'm not going to talk to you about the law. I'm going to talk to you about the facts.
Okay, just talk about what the evidence will show,
Right.
not argument.
On choke number 1, Mr. Copenhaver, this is a choke on the bed in the beginning. Mr. Copenhaver attempts to get Mr. Thomas into a choke. Mr. Thomas is bigger than Mr. Copenhaver and also has some degree of self-defense or fighting training. You will hear that Ray, who called the police, is a boxer in his own right and is one of Floyd Mayweather's bodyguards. It is also from Europe what they call a maxillofacial surgeon. That's why he called Ray. Maxillofacial surgeon deals with fractures of the face. And Ray said, I think the evidence is going to show it took about a half an hour, and Ray said eventually you got to call the cops. These are injuries, you have to go to the hospital. And they did. And Mr. Thomas was reluctant. This was 2 guys. I got caught in bed. That's what he says. He didn't want to call the cops. And he wanted Ray to tell him he'd be okay, but Ray didn't say that. So choke number 1 is on the bed, and Mr. Thomas uses something, a lower arm bar. Mr. Thomas, the evidence will show Mr. Thomas used some type of maneuver to break Mr. Copenhaver's hold on him, and that's when they went over the bed and Mr. Copenhaver's head went into the wall. And then when you're off balance, you fall down, which Mr. Thomas will tell you about. It's choke number 1. Choke number 2 is the more significant choke. That's when they recover on the floor and Mr. Copenhaver gets him into the choke that was described as beginning to feel lightheaded, oh my gosh, I'm going to die in Christie's bathroom. And he gets his fingers in there. Now the third choke, now he's let up from that, and the third choke is what's called a seat belt. It's just to hold him, to restrain him. And that's when the conversation ensues. And that's when he is let go. There's going to be a lot of evidence that you don't hear in this case. And there's going to be a lot of questions left. And the evidence isn't going to show conclusively. Well, I'll just leave it as that. The last thing is, there is no Perry Mason moment in this case. This case comes together at closing argument. Like the year before there, we ask that you take your time and you listen carefully to both sides. To both sides. And with that, thank you.
Why do you say, what?
Can we have a recess, Shawner, so we can get our first witness?
Okay, sure. Okay, folks, so we're going to take a short break. Take about 10 minutes. During this recess, you were admonished not to talk or converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this trial, or to read, watch, or listen to any report of or commentary on the trial, or any person connected with this trial by any medium of information, including without limitation newspapers, television, the internet, or radio, or to form or express any opinion on any subject connected with this trial until the case is finally submitted to you. Okay, that's it.
All rise. With no reason. Let's go. That's the way to rock. Stun. Stun. Aye. Aye. Yeah. Wait outside. All right. Please be seated, or leave, or do whatever you need to do. Folks, if you're going to leave, the jurors out in the hallway. Don't talk to them, don't look at them, don't smile at them, don't do anything with them. Thank you.
Thank you.
With apologies, Lady Hurricane, but we got them. If you want me to take some time and look at these are exhibits. If I can, if you don't want to take tomorrow, somebody. Oh, okay, yes. You can, just anytime you guys just. Okay, no, I was saying if we could stable some together that may.
Well, it's fine unless these are, or you want these marked individually?